Hey, we just had David Tensen on. David is a poet and
philosopher,
yeah,
and
inner healer,
relational theologian, wise soul.
And he's from Australia.
Yeah.
Which is cool.
Yeah.
We had to do this podcast at a whole different hour than we normally do, making it convenient for him.
We got to spend the evening having dinner together with our wives before recording with David.
It was awesome.
It was.
And so was this podcast.
Yes. This is one for the deep part of your soul.
It's a passionate one.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was good.
We talked about his book, So I Wrote You a Poem.
And another one called The Wrestle.
Powerful, powerful stuff. There's revelation here. David dives into trauma. He dives into pain. He's empathetic in a way that is just like Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the most powerful part of how he operates is that he's really addressing the fact that our God never leaves us, never forsakes us, that he's with us in the highs and especially in the lows.
Yeah. Yeah. I really enjoyed David's vulnerability and passion.
Yeah.
For seeing people healed out of his own experience of difficult situations in life.
Yeah, this one's powerful. This one's really, really powerful.
Like, I really want to go and write poems now. I don't know.
Do you write poetry?
Haiku.
I didn't know that.
Check my Twitter feed. You'll see a few haikus there.
Okay.
But no, this is legit stories that people have sent to David.
Yeah.
Almost Humans of New York style, that he turns into a poem that addresses not only the situation that the person is writing about that has caused grief in their life, but also brings a spiritual level of healing, inner healing, to the reader, whoever the reader may be. And we talked about one in particular on Terminating Pregnancy that is one of the most powerful poems I think I've ever heard in my life.
Pretty profound. Yeah, we touched on a couple of subjects that because he's approaching it through poetry and he's approaching it through our union or through restoration, there's just so much life.
Yeah. David also talks about the LGBTQ community and their relationship with the church, and I thought that was so insightful.
Yeah, how to love.
Yeah.
Just how to be love.
How to love everyone the most.
Yeah. Yeah, this is a good one, man.
It's really good to have you on this, and for a couple of reasons. I want to thank you right off the bat because of the time frame. Derek and his wife Sarah came over for dinner so that we could hang out together and then come in here and interview you. So because of you, man, we got to have dinner with our good friends, the Turners.
That's what it takes.
That's what it takes, I guess.
Did you have tacos?
We did talk about it, but no, my wife was in the mood for comfort food. So,
but I feel like tacos are comfort food.
Yeah,
but
you're
it
right.
would just be too cliche in doing the podcast at the same time. So tell us about life in Australia. Married, children, a little bit about your background.
Yep. So, well, it's 8:20 a.m. here, and my kids just walked out of the door 10 minutes ago. So I've got 3 children. And we live within walking distance of school, which is great. So I've got a girl who's 16, a daughter who's 16, a boy who turns 13 in a couple of weeks, and another boy who turns 11 later this year. So I've got 2 in what we call high school.
Yeah.
And then a young fella as well. So, and my wife, we've been married for 23 years now. We got married pretty young.
Yeah.
No, we were 19.
When you got married or when you met?
Hey, we met when we were 17 and we were married by 19.
Wow.
Yeah.
Love it.
You guys grew up together.
We basically have. Yeah. I mean, we've known each other more than half our life. So this is our wedding photo. This was us.
Love it.
That's awesome. Yeah, kids.
Yeah, we were kids. We were totally kids. We look at our daughter and we're like, man, we were married 3 years, 2.5 years older than you are now. That's crazy. Anyway.
Yeah.
That's when it gets real.
I got married at 21. I have a 22-year-old.
Oh, wow.
So there's days when I think, man, my goodness, I was married at this age.
Yeah. I've got a 23-year-old daughter and a 14-year-old daughter. So, and a neutered dog. So that's my life. My
neutered dog. I have a spayed dog. And we have a bird too. It's a circus. Yeah. So yeah, my parents moved here in the 70s and from Holland, and had me a couple of years later, and so I grew up here. I grew up here, as an Australian citizen, but in a European home. So Dutch was my first language. So I grew up in a different state to where I am now. I grew up in Victoria. And Derek, you've been to Australia, so you may know some of the states. So I was in Victoria, and then years later, in my teens, my parents moved to the state I'm in now, which is Queensland. And it's actually an island. It's called Bribie Island. Strange name, but it was about an hour from the major city, and lovely kind of holiday destination. Not a lot of kids, one high school, so I went to that high school, and it was there I met some Christian friends, and that's where I made my decision to become a Christian, and kind of moved forward from there. Met my wife a few years later.
Yeah.
Got pretty heavily involved in the church, in ministry, working in that space, particularly in administration.
Yeah.
Music. I was a music director for years, and then we moved to Japan and did missions in Tokyo for a year and a half. We sold up.
Yeah.
Went to Japan. That was really cool with our youngest, with our daughter, who was our only child at the time, and served over there in a church plant, which was pretty cool. Something our denomination ran. So the denomination I was part of was the Assemblies of God. It's the Assemblies of God in Australia is now the Australian Christian Churches,
Right.
Which is, if you think of Hillsong, that's most of the world knows who Hillsong is.
Yeah.
Well, at one point, I think Brian Houston was the head of the Assemblies at one point, or when it transferred over.
He was the head of that, as well as Hillsong. So that's I was part of that movement for quite a while. Did the missions with them. Came back. We had our second and third child. Natalie got postnatal depression. We went through some pretty difficult seasons, and it was there I was like the God I knew, and that movement had presented me, God of the breakthrough. And I mean, it's kind of refreshing, some of that, if we talk about it, but at the same time, it was like I have nowhere to put my suffering right now. I have no context, nothing. So I found an inner healing ministry called Elijah House Ministries. They do training. They train you for inner healing. Do you guys know it?
I've heard of it.
Yeah. Who runs that?
John and Paula Sanford were the founders. They've both passed away. It was probably the largest. It's out of Spokane, Washington. So there was quite a large training school here in Australia. It was the second largest after the US branch, and I got involved in that, and it was like, I can do this. Like, I'm actually really good at this, and ended up running that ministry for a few years, managing that ministry Australia-wide, and then from that I started itinerating, and mainly spending a lot of time with pastors and leaders.
Yeah.
Derek, it sounds like you've done itinerant kind of traveled work. I'm not sure about you, Jason, but it's a weekend gig generally.
Yeah.
You fly in Friday or Saturday, and you go home Sunday night, Monday, and recover the rest of the week till the next trip. I would arrive a few days earlier or stay a few days later and spend a lot of time one-on-one in offering counsel and prayer ministry to pastors and leaders and leadership in the church.
Yeah.
I cut my teeth on that and traveled, and that was my thing for about 7 years till all that didn't work out anymore and was unsustainable with a young family.
Yeah.
Financially, but also spiritually and emotionally, it was just not a sustainable model. So
Sure.
now I went back. Then I went to uni. Went back to uni. What I discovered is I was spending a lot of time with churches, and I don't know what the climate's like in the States, but I found that, and I have a huge heart for pastors. Like, there's a big soft spot in my heart because I've sat and wept and spent time with so many. But you have to run a business. Like, you're having to lead an organization, and as well as everything else today. So
Sure.
that I went and did an organizational leadership degree, and then an honors in that same sort of space as well. I loved that, and so now I Now my time is spent moving to today. I spend a couple days a week working for a Christian non-for-profit, which is a global outreach, online missions and evangelism. They like reach about 1 million people a day, telling them about Jesus. And I run leadership development and training for them.
What's the name of that organization, David?
It's called CV Global. CV Global.
Okay.
Yeah. They have an app called Yes He Is, and basically it's a faith sharing app where this is one of the things that they do.
Yeah.
They also partner with people in developing countries. Like, for example, when we were in Japan, the church there was growing, but no one really knew how to do social media ads, telling people about the gospel. So, like, CV partners with people like them and basically will work with them to advertise, run Facebook campaigns. We've got a lot of social media gurus there who it's all funded by a billionaire. So it's basically a giant charity from a British billionaire who just wants to tell people about Jesus. So I do that a couple of days a week, and then I write poetry and look after my family. So
I love it.
Yeah, we want to dive into the poetry.
Yeah.
But I want to just jump back to one thing you said. You mentioned just offhand that your wife went through postpartum depression.
Mm.
Would you say that was a catalyst for maybe some of the old school breakthrough, everybody's a winner, you got it, just need more faith type of vibe to embracing suffering and walking through grief? Was that maybe one of those moments, or were there more?
That was hugely that moment.
Okay. Yeah, I gathered that when you mentioned it.
I fast-tracked that part, but being involved in music for years, I wanted to, in my 20s particularly, I thought, you have a mountain you want to climb, you have an Everest, there's a goal.
Yeah.
There's that kid who's the youth pastor in his 20s who wants to be the senior pastor sometime in his 30s, in most cases, or have some kind of elevated position. So I'd come back from Japan, and about a year and a half later was invited to run the music team of what we would call in Australia a large mega kind of church, which is 1,000 to 2,000 people in our area. So that was me. I was the guy on the stage. Music and media team were bigger than most of the local churches, and I'd arrived. Meanwhile, I'm busting my guts volunteering, running the services, and my wife's at home with 3 kids suffering postpartum depression.
Yeah.
And I just couldn't maintain it, and that didn't fit the job, the the undefined job description of the church at the moment. They need somebody young and full of energy. You'd get before the service, let's pray, let's pump it up, let's thank God, and I'm like, can we just shut up and just be still? Because I've had kids screaming all morning. I'm over it. So they did a messy job, they admitted later, but I was basically shafted and we left. But that was the catalyst. And in the midst of that, I said, I've got nowhere to put this. Thank God I came across like Elijah House, for example.
Yeah.
And then a whole lot of other inner healing modalities and the writings of people like Richard Rohr and a lot of your Catholics and people who have been around a lot longer than Pentecostal movements, who are like only 110 years old.
Yeah.
And have seen and been through hell and back, and have a place and words and a theology for suffering.
Yeah.
And that was, it blew my mind. I was like, what the heck? So Christ, to know him resurrected and the fellowship of his suffering, I never realized there was fellowship in the sufferings.
Yeah.
That started that journey for me. I'm sure you guys can relate.
Yeah, that
absolutely.
My first introduction to you and some of your work was we had Paul Young on the podcast.
Oh yeah.
And at the end of a beautiful conversation with a man who understands suffering. Yeah. And understands how to navigate it outside of the religious restraints that he grew up in. We had this beautiful conversation, and I'd had a chance to talk to him before, and any interaction I have with him, he's just pulsating love.
Yeah.
And he tells me, you got to know David. You got to check this guy out. Oh. And so I've probably been following you for about a year, like, a fly on your social media wall or your Instagram wall. And one of the things that I so love about your work is, and I was telling Derek, is that you're a man that clearly has been to the pit and is convinced that God was there with him and found God there. I want to dive into this particular work. So I wrote you a poem, because I know that's the most recent, and I've been reading through it. But one of the major themes is that there's a restorative lens on everything that you write. Even when you're in the pit, and you're brilliant at articulating it, there's hope in that place. And it's not the kind of hope you talked about where you got to whip it up. It's something way deeper. It's the kind of hope that understands suffering and doesn't dismiss it. And I would love for you to tell us a little bit about this particular book. So I wrote you a poem, and I would guess some of that came out of even what you've just told us.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so that's the book. So I wrote you a poem. I actually wrote this year. So you usually don't write a book that quick, but
right.
I'd released a book late last year called The Wrestle, which has a lot of the poems that Paul and others wrote, and there's a very personal book, The Wrestle.
Yeah.
And a lot of them, all those poems most of those poems, except maybe a handful of those 50 plus poems were for me and about me and in my journey.
Yeah.
And but so I wrote you a poem at the start of this year. I kind of just, I don't know where I heard it or I thought about it. I put on Instagram, hey, if you've got a poem you'd like me to write, just send me your story. And I made it, I was quite strict on it. I was like, make sure it only goes to my Instagram inbox.
Yeah.
Like I didn't want things filling up. I didn't know what would happen. And I'm glad I said that because my inbox kind of filled up pretty quick.
Right.
And I ended up with about 60 stories.
Right.
Everything from infertility to abortion to complex PTSD to depression to same-sex ostracization in churches to ableism. There's a poem in there for the one who comes to church in a wheelchair. So all these people wrote to me, and then some of the themes began to overlap, So there were a number of the poems. Most of them are not written just for the one person in mind, but they're written with some of the overlap. And then some of the people that I counseled or spent time with, the hundreds and hundreds of people that I did spend time with previously in the work that I did in that space as well. So The Wrestle is a lot about my internal journey.
Yeah.
But so I wrote you a poem. I leaned into my, very cautiously, and then had to pull out. I leant into my empathy, which I've discovered, and I'm trying to be more confident in saying, because it's a good and a bad, like it's a challenge to wear, etc. And my wife's always very cautious. You're getting in too deep, Dave. But I can just walk into that space. It made me very good at what I did in the counseling work.
Sure.
And so I took my love for poetry and the love I have for writing and my empathy, and I started writing all these poems for people and posting them on Instagram. And I did that every day for about 30 days. Every day I collect typewriters.
Okay.
So it was also a great way for me to, use my typewriters and just get in the habit of using people's stories as a prompt and writing poems. And then I would send it to them, and the healing stories and everything that came off the back of that was like, wow.
Yeah.
And I thought, I've just got to put this in a book. It's a smaller book. It's a smaller collection. It's more like a chapbook. It's like $10 on Amazon. It's smaller. It's half the size of my last, but I needed it to go out there for those who could relate,
Yeah.
And so that's why I called it So I Wrote You a Poem, because nearly all of them are for people that wrote in,
right.
And people like them as well.
David, one thing I really love about this, and I'm gonna amp the book up a whole lot more and tell everybody they must go buy it, because I believe you've captured the same vibe of kind of the Humans of New York Instagram, of a story being told. But the beauty of what you've done is you've brought it into the poetic realm. And even though that is another person's story, you've brought language into it that you actually call in your introduction of the book the language of lament, that poetry is the language of lament. I absolutely love that. You also said that poetry is like lullabies for adults. I think that's how you said it. But I want everybody in our audience, Rethinking God, to understand that this is a introduction into a storytelling means that is so in line with the Holy Spirit. When you mentioned that you dive deep into empathy and your wife may try to pull you back, I would put the Holy Spirit in that same category as the person of the Godhead who dives deep into empathy and really understands and knows. And so I just want our audience to understand what they're in for in this. So I wrote you a poem book, and the language that you bring is just absolutely beautiful, to almost retelling stories. I know it's healing for the people that wrote in and shared their stories, but it transcends that. And it reminds me of a verse in Colossians when Paul said, the comfort you have received from God is so that you can comfort others. And you are transforming pain, not into hype and victory, but transforming pain into a story form that can so empathize with other people. I absolutely love this. And I just want to encourage our audience to get a hold of it and follow you on social media and all the things. But tell me a little bit about the language of lament, that poetry is the language of lament, and that poetry is like lullabies for adults.
I mean, the Old Testament has a book called Lamentations. We don't often preach from it. I think I heard Rob Bell when they started Mars Hill back in the day. His opening sermon series was on Lamentations, which made me laugh.
Yeah.
But if I'm right, the figures are 47% of the Psalms, which are poems. Song is a poem, you know.
Yeah.
47% of the Psalms are Psalms of lament, you know. And I think we owe it to ourselves in seasons and times to discover God as actually being omnipresent. And I mean, we've just gone through Easter a few weeks ago. There is the part where he ascended and went into hell, like he's in the depths, you know.
He's everywhere. Yeah.
There's nowhere that he is not. This was King David's revelation as a king. Like, I mean, the dude had arrived. Like, he had everything at his disposal: armies, people, wealth, gold, and you know, he was the manager. He was the guy in charge, and yet he understood the power of lament. He understood its place in the world. And in a world in which back then they were a lot closer and exposed to death than we are now.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know when the last time you saw blood spill on the ground. We don't even have to see that if you're a meat eater. The meat that you buy, you don't have to see the animal slaughtered. You don't have to go to the temple and see that. We're very removed from death today as well. So I think that's also, Richard Beck does some exceptional work in that area. Talks about existential anxiety and neurotic anxiety, and I think that all plays into it. We just want nothing to do with anything that looks and smells like death, because we think it's the final verse. We think that's the end. We'll do anything that we think you've failed. Once you've died, you've failed. Once you've burnt out, you've failed. Once you're divorced, you've failed. Once you whatever, fill in the blank. I've failed, and I've died. I'm dead. There's some Australian birds there for you. So I think lament is really important, and I know some denominations and movements do it really well and overdo it, and then there are some movements and denominations that underdo it, don't do it very well at all, and each of those has its markers, and each of those has its spiritual markers, and each of those has its reasons for that. And thank God that we do have a good spectrum, a broad spectrum in Christendom, but that would require you to maybe spend half your life as a Pentecostal and the other life in Catholicism or something, where where you've learnt to do this well, to sit in silences, to be with those that are closer to the edge or have fallen in towards death and suffering.
Yeah.
And so I felt it kind of partly my duty to maybe bring that back a little bit, the blessing of lament, and that we're able to poetry. I just don't know any other form. Like I've written a lot of stuff and blogs over the years, but as soon as you write a blog and you make statements, even if you're making academic, peer-reviewed, references, like you've done your work, you've done the homework, you've been rigorous in the way that you've presented something.
Yeah.
There'll always be someone that, like, not just argues but wants to argue, like it triggers in them and they're writing back in prose straight away.
Sure.
Poetry or storytelling, you just don't get that option. Like C.S. Lewis said, these stories or fictions allow us to steal past sleeping dragons, and it's the language of the heart. You can't.
That's right.
David White says there's no, you don't have to defend poetry. It is what it is. Like no one reads the Psalms and goes, I don't know, that's not right. Well, it's a bloody song. Like it's poetry. It's allegory. It's analogy.
That's right.
It just is an entire different genre. It's storytelling. Some people may not agree with some of the stands that I've taken in some of the poems if they read between the lines in some of my books.
Sure.
The LGBT one in the So I Wrote You a Poem.
Yeah.
There's one in the Wrestle about God being in control or not being in control, and there's one on the fire of God or the hellfire of God, which was a George MacDonald. I wrote after reading a George MacDonald stuff about his view on hell. And listen to Brad Jerzak, who I think has been on your show, has done exceptional work there. And so if you read between the lines, you could disagree, but I'm not presenting a theological argument. I'm presenting... Now, at the same time, guys, I'm an Enneagram 9, so I get to avoid conflict and enjoy myself on the way as well.
Hey guys, I'm interrupting this podcast for just a minute so I can invite you to partner with us by giving to A Family Story. A Family Story is a 501, a nonprofit, and it's our ministry. And it's what allows for me to produce this podcast and other regular content. We've been living this faith journey for a long time, but 2014 was when we officially stepped away from the traditional pastoring approach to full-time ministry. It's been fun. This journey's been wild. And this last year was no less faith-inducing, with COVID affecting travel and speaking. And it's been good, because hey, we started a podcast. Our passion is to create content catalytic for an encounter with the always good, transforming, reconciling love of our Heavenly Father. And so our heart through this ministry has always been that through speaking, writing, film, and music, we're relentlessly sharing the goodness of our Father, the good news. Your giving goes directly to support this podcast, as well as written content, discipleship content, teaching small group messages, articles that we release weekly, and also the book I'm writing. I'm excited about what I'm chasing down right now. We appreciate all the support, whether it's sharing, writing a review, following us, signing up for our email list, or financially. We just love being on the journey with you. If you want to give to A Family Story, you can go to afamilystory.org, afamilystory.org, and click on the Give button. All right, thanks, guys. Let's get back to the podcast.
There's a kinship with you. For 10 years, we had a band, and I'm a singer-songwriter, and then I've done a lot of writing, and I'm not an academic. I'm a relational guy and a storyteller. And when you can approach something through story, like you said, we all can connect to it.
Yeah.
And there's a liberty to interpret it. What I loved, and so I wrote you a poem. Your dedication, you wrote, "You are not alone."
Mm-hmm.
And that phrase resonates for me. That is the gospel message.
Yeah.
That is Jesus, the most empathetic act, stepping into flesh and becoming humanity with us. And that phrase, "You are not alone," to me, it is maybe the most significant thing that we get to tell people. What I'm writing right now is really just that. It's in a world where I grew up theologically with separation baked into almost every aspect of the nature of God and his interaction with humanity. My rethinking, or if I weren't in the West, we would have called this podcast Reimagining. But my reimagining has had everything to do with the fact that though I make my bed in Sheol, he's with me. That nothing separates us from the love of God, neither life or death, angels or demons, nothing can separate us. And that's, to me, the foundation of this podcast, the reason that we have folks like you on, because what you're running at here is, regardless of whether we're having a theological conversation about eternal conscious torment, and we've done that here, and regardless of what you believe about LGBTQ, the foundation is you're not alone. Jesus is here saying you're not alone.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, that's Jesus. That's the gospel.
Right.
I would love for you to speak to that a little.
Father Thomas Keating, who some of you may know, has kind of been a champion of centering prayer. He said the chief thing that separates us from God is the thought that we are separated from God, and really pushed pretty hard on understanding that this lifetime, we're going to spend most of this lifetime having to undo this monumental lie that we are separated from God. That I can say that to any of you listeners, and you're like, yeah, I know he's Emmanuel. What helped me incredibly during my time, spending a lot of time in the inner healing circles and with other people. Elijah House was one methodology and approach. There's I don't know if you know the guys from the Life Model or.
Yeah.
My wife is a Life Model fanatic.
Yeah, I love the Life Model.
So yes, very, very familiar.
Same language. So Carl Lehman, Dr. Carl Lehman and the guys there created and are continually tweaking their Emmanuel approach through memory and maybe times and encounters where you felt strongly connected to God. In one of these sessions, I would say, go back to a time where you felt strongly connected with God, like good connection on your mobile phone, on your cell phone, like looking for a 5-bar time. Go back to that memory.
Yeah.
Describe it to me.
Yeah.
Okay, and then go back to the memory, describe it, and then begin to tell Jesus what you appreciated about that time. And that simple exercise of gratitude and going back will often strengthen a great sense of Emmanuel. Your relational circuits turn on in your brain. A whole lot of good stuff happens within you. So I practiced that for years and walked a lot of people through that. I'm mentioning this because I can mention the Thomas Keating statement. We know he's Emmanuel. We know, as you said there, Jason, he's in the depths of Sheol. Like, this is the terrifying thing is he's with you. The good news is he's with you, so depending if you're afraid that God will smite you and melt you if he knew you did something, or if you're grateful he's there, it doesn't matter. He's there anyway.
He's there.
So but to experience that and to lean into that and to spend a lifetime becoming gradually more aware and comfortable with the fact that he's here and seeing what that looks like in my marriage, in my work life, raising my kids, being a friend to people, sitting with those in pain, hearing stories, writing poetry. All that has to transform that. So I spent a lot of years doing this Emmanuel kind of thing, and then another approach, a wonderful approach called Heart Sync, which uses a similar methodology. And that was so transformative for me. Like, I spent 7-8 years in the front line of that and experienced a lot of it myself and walked a lot of people through those things too. So I had the immense privilege, and if there is something I really miss about doing it, it is being one-on-one with somebody, whether it's on Zoom or I was doing Zoom before COVID.
Right.
That's how cool I was. Before, whether it was on Zoom or it was in person, to see somebody have a genuine encounter with Jesus, and to be surprised by that, and to be surprised by what he says, and to be surprised by his kindness, his non-violence, his kindness, like his grace, his patience, he's better. He is actually better than most of us think, kinder than most of us think. And I love Baxter Kruger when he says, I think by the time if there is a great banquet and we're sitting around the table in heaven, it'll be kind of like a family joke, because we'll be seeing people at the table. We're like, I thought you guys wouldn't make it. And they're like, there's this kind of sense of, hopefully, that would be the spirit there. And I love that idea, because there's nowhere he's not. And including after you've breathed your last breath. Death's been overcome. So, and as Brad Jerzak always I heard him once in a discussion with somebody, or maybe it was John McMurray.
Yes.
John McMurray.
Yes.
I saw he came and visited Australia a few years ago, and I just by chance got to meet him, and but somebody in the small group said, what about this? What about this? What about when you die, you'll be judged? And then he just said, well, God's mercy endures forever, right? I don't know if forever has a full stop on it. Like, it is actually forever. So this whole idea of Emmanuel with us, this whole idea of never being separated, is, I love that, and I try to lean into that, and I can say with some sense of confidence, guys, that I've had such beautiful encounters with Jesus over the years that it's transformed. I can't be convinced of him in another light. I'm sorry. I've seen him work. Not just healing an arm, which is great, and not just all that's great, but actually moving in, sitting with the small child inside of a guy who says, I can't forgive my dad. And we invite Jesus in, and he sits next to this kid, back against the wall, arm around him, and says, look, I'll help you forgive your dad if you want. You know what I mean?
Wow.
Gee, like, that's,
Yeah.
and then that guy forgives his dad.
Yeah.
And that changes the trajectory of his life.
Yeah.
In a phenomenal way. The relationship with his dad, the relationship with his kids.
Everything changes.
He went from not being able to public speak to being like the president of his local Toastmasters. I mean, these kind of things for me, I said to somebody, an old pastor friend of mine, I said, if I didn't read the Bible again, I'm actually I'm okay with that, like, because I know the living word. I wouldn't want that, but if that was it, my faith is not dependent any longer. It was. I needed that, but right now,
so good. Yeah, so good.
I don't know. Your thoughts?
Yeah.
One thing I tell people. And the thing I get traction with is I tell people, oh man, I love the Word of God, and I like my Bible too, and just bringing Jesus into that real space. You mentioned a couple things that I just have to have our listeners follow up with, and at least Google this, but Google HeartSync, Google Life Model. If you're interested at all in methods and modology of inner healing, Emmanuel moments. These are things that can really truly help you. You're talking about it from a pretty high level view, but I've been through HeartSync myself, and it was life changing. It was absolutely life changing.
Wow, that's cool.
And I feel like, you mentioned it a while back. One of your poems about God being in control speaks right to Jason's book title, God is not in control. But what we do have is a God who knows what it's like to be us. Because he became one of us. And this empathy is really what the world is absolutely craving and needs. We can't give it until we experience it ourselves. And it's those experiences that we want to lead people into. obviously the Holy Spirit is so engaged in bringing every heart to the reality of the finished work of Christ, the reality of Christ in you, the hope of glory. This is why we preach Christ, to awaken hearts to a reality. And it is, you're right, it's beautiful when those moments of the past are recognized as, okay, like, Jesus, where were you? Where were you? And he reveals himself in that memory and heals that memory. I have a significant one in my own life. I won't go into it now, but and it just absolutely erased shame in my life. Like, it erased shame in that moment. More than I could have done in thousands of hours of counseling. It was that moment with Jesus where he put a robe of many colors around me and said, I love you. You're my favorite kid.
I know, right? I mean, those moments are when he says it, when he says, you know, he's not an idiot, he's mine. You know, when he says, don't worry, we've got all the time we need. When he says, I was with you. You know, when somebody who's suffered at the hands of a man, a daughter who suffers at the hands of an abusive father, looks back and has for 20 years been wondering, Jesus, where were you? Why didn't you stop it? And the scene changes and Jesus is in her taking the beating with her. Because we do know of this, of trauma, right? Like, there's the thing that happens, which is bad. I mean, I'm getting a little life model here. But we're talking B-type trauma, the bad stuff that happens to you, not the A-type, where it's the absence of good things. But we know from trauma what makes the biggest difference, because we all do suffer trauma in some way. What they're finding makes the biggest difference is who was there during it, and then who was there afterwards. And what the process looked like, what you had to do with that trauma during and then afterwards. So it's the presence of other people that actually makes the biggest difference to whether you get stuck in it or whether you're able to metabolize it. There'll always be a consequence. There'll always be some kind of scar or an open wound. But a scar is often a healed wound. And so around the presence of others, being around the right people and absolutely 100%, when you encounter Jesus relationally, with your relational circuits on, like you did, Derek, and he says these 4 or 5 words to you, and you see in his eyes and you feel his presence, like that melts that stuff away. That's the healing.
Absolutely. One of the things I think that you said that's so important that people need to understand is we have a Savior, a high priest who is touched with the feelings of our infirmities. He knows what it's like to be us. But not only that, when you mention the people around you that have represented him well or brought him into the scene, we need to realize that our process in this life is becoming those people for others. And that it is often through, especially I think the B-type trauma, when you're talking about, my own story, my first wife was killed by a drunk driver. She was 7 months pregnant.
Oh, man.
I watched the whole thing. I was with her. These aren't things that you just like snap a faith statement and confess it away. But when you have people around you who are at a place in their own lives where they have overcome the kind of, not overcome, I don't even like using those words anymore, where they have endured the kind of suffering and come through with a joy-filled radiance that represents Jesus, then we can truly begin to serve others in that capacity. It's just like we need to become healed so that we can become healers. And I just don't trust anyone that doesn't have a limp anymore. I mean, if you get on stage and you tell me that your life is awesome, it's all been up and to the right, I'm like, yeah, okay, we're done.
Totally.
I don't want to listen to another word you have to say. But I feel like there's something even deeper in the way that you bring the poetry element into it. In this, so I wrote you a poem, because your you're diving into someone's story and you're transforming it into something really beautiful. That's what Jesus does. So thank you.
I'm trying. I think probably too. Like I left school at 16, so I didn't have kind of an academic background or anything like that. But I just felt my wife had finished her degree, and I thought, hit 40, and I was like, I'd actually like to go and do something. So I enrolled, and you do begin to have to think a little bit different and critically as well. And I felt I had a knack for it anyway, because I probably, like you guys, I'm curious. Like, I just want to know, people want to know more, and if I can, like, there's a poem in the new book which is about terminating pregnancy, and I discovered quite a few women wrote in, who said, well, I had to terminate a pregnancy. I still live with the shame of it.
Yeah.
I don't know what the numbers are. I think it's higher than we'd like to think in church, of Christian women who have had to or made a decision even before they were Christians, or whatever the case is.
Sure.
Because it's such a...
I actually think it's like either 1 in 4 or 1 in 5, if I remember correctly.
Okay. So we're talking a huge amount of the population. But in that poem, do you want me to read it to you? Do you want to? I can read it out.
We would love that. Yeah, please.
And then I'll pick a couple things out. So this is called "For the One Who Terminated a Pregnancy and Feels Ostracized by Churches." Big lengthy title. Oh, how to write a poem or mention this, particularly in a chapel without bracing yourself, as it is the most delicate and personal of topics, where most involved are rarely given an audience, grace or sympathy for their plight, regardless of the regret or shame they carry for years. And this is delicate, I know, for women of faith or otherwise to terminate a pregnancy, marking them as modern-day murderers, outcast and heartless, political pawns without pardon or plea, which are the strangest of sentences from those quick to forget that "thou shalt not murder" was etched in a stone held by a man who ended the life of another, hiding him in the silent sand. Ranking this man of God en masse amongst kings, saints and prophets who did the very same. And this is delicate, I know, but the silence, endured partiality of it all gathers grief, prolongs trauma, heals nothing, hides behind the lie that Jesus wept, but she didn't. And grace is insufficient for her, but ample for those with stones in their hands. And this is delicate, I know, because casting stones is easier than supporting single mothers, or opening homes to foster children, or opening hearts to foster compassion for those who live with shame, for they long to let go of too.
Beautiful. Man, so powerful.
So there's a few things in that. There's the "thou shalt not murder," which we know is painted on pickets outside of clinics.
Yeah.
Who the hell wrote that? Who held that stone?
Yeah.
Like, Moses murdered a man. He lived with shame.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know how he processed that at the time. I mean, I know death and murder was more common than it is today, but there he is. I don't know if he felt like a sense of redemption, but it's quick to forget that. And as you kind of pointed to before, Derek, is there's this spiritual bypassing of, well, read the scriptures and do this, and
yeah.
And the other part of this is this whole idea of, and research would support this, that if you want to lower the abortion rate, go support single mothers. Like,
yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Geez, it just pisses me off.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
And I don't know if you know Nick Vujicic, or no, Nick what's his name? The guy without the arms and legs. Do you know the guy?
Australian guy.
He's an Australian guy. Yep. He came to our workplace a few years ago, and he actually said, I'm kind of sick of people going and pressing the abortion thing. Why don't you foster some kids, for goodness sake? Like, foster some kids,
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
look after some single mums, and then have your say. Like, because it's cheap to hold a stone.
Yeah.
And just to throw it out, for example. So, do I think it's a travesty and a tragedy? Yeah, I do. And a lot of the women who've been through this that I wrote this for wouldn't disagree with me. Like, this is was not ideal, but this is the reality I live with now. And why don't we? The research shows if you support single mothers, abortion, and all those things go down. And this is the call of the gospel, to look after the widows and the orphans.
Yeah.
Like, what if we just did that?
Yeah.
What if we started there?
Yeah.
For example. And so I wanted to include those kind of things in the poetry, weave it in poetically, because it's important, I think, to help be a voice and let people know that they're not alone. Like, you stand with kings and priests.
Yeah.
So
That's the you used the word earlier, omnipresent. That's the nature of love. The nature of love and the nature of justice is such that God is both with the victim and the victimized at the same time. And he lives outside of time and space. Love is measureless, so it's not just about this moment. The one that's bullied today was bullied 20 years ago. And the reality is that God was there then and he's here now.
Yeah.
And restoration has to be for both.
Yeah.
And what you're writing is, you're not alone. I'm here in this moment. I'm here in that moment. And I'm redeeming and I'm restoring all these things. And I think the way that you're talking about this particular issue is restorative.
Absolutely.
Again, it's an approach of, hey, moms are making decisions and there are so many complexities around this, but they're doing the best they can.
Yeah.
That's one of our phrases in our house. We have a couple phrases. Love is the long game. Family is the long game.
Love it. And
they're doing the best they can.
I know, right?
And I love that what you're talking about is, how do I climb in to this place? Baxter Kruger talks about Jesus stepping inside our delusion and coming in and blowing it up from the inside. This is a desperate decision. Most often it's made out of desperation and fear and anxiety. And Jesus is climbing in. Our Father's climbing in that place. And how do we partner with him? Oh man, it's the orphans and the widows. It's how do we practically love? What does that look like? Yeah, man, I love that.
Oh, thanks.
Well, and I think the restorative nature of tying it in with Moses is
Dude,
brilliant, because here's a man. You mentioned that, well, maybe murder was a little more acceptable or a little more common in those days, but yet it still caused Moses the kind of fear and shame to run into isolation and hiding. How many women are living their lives in isolation and hiding because they feel that same thing in regards to the termination of a pregnancy? And yet, where did God meet Moses? He met him in the place of isolation,
so good, bro.
Place of hiding, place of shame.
Yeah.
And he brought him back into a restorative, redemptive plan for all the people. It wasn't just about one incident. And so I think to me that's so encouraging for maybe a woman who's experienced a termination of a pregnancy and abortion. We've seen it happen in our own church. We're seeing it happen in a really great organization here in Charlotte that is focusing in on not just being anti-abortion, but being pro-foster care, pro-single mom,
pro-dad.
Yeah.
Pro-dad.
Yeah, the whole thing.
And just reaching the whole show.
Yeah.
How beautiful, though, is it to know that, man, you belong. You still and always have
You're
belonged.
not alone.
Yeah.
You are seen, and I am with you. Whether you're, whether you're doing the deed and burying it in the sand, or whether you're hiding in the desert in shame and isolation.
Yeah, I mean, he buries him in the sand, right? Like, he actually hides him. He stuffs the body like a ninja,
right?
Like, it's gone, and that's where God meets him.
Wow.
In the middle of nowhere, in the sand.
Yeah. That's the kind of God he is. Isn't that amazing?
Man, David,
Wow.
we didn't anticipate diving into this element, but I really feel like
Yeah.
I feel like Holy Spirit's hand is all over
Yeah.
this for some of our listeners
Mm.
to realize that wow, what if God's judgment is mercy?
Yeah.
What if we realize at the end of it all, God's judgment is
It's good, man.
mercy?
Yeah.
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 And I like the
Yeah.
point you raised before, like he you know, I always thought about this in John chapter 8, where the woman's caught in the midst of adultery, and I want, you know, you guys probably know there should have been more witnesses.
Yeah.
But Jesus actually, like, he not only saves the woman from being stoned,
Saves the men.
he like saves all these people from murdering
Murdering
her.
her. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's pretty cool.
Like, there's always this other side.
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
There's always this side. He's like, he just is able to stand in the middle
Yeah.
and save the whole picture.
Yeah. 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 I love that you said that, because I was just having that conversation with somebody. I'm like, he didn't play the game they were playing. He didn't play this retribution game.
No.
He stepped back. He removed shame and condemnation, and then he invited everyone to step into wholeness in life. It looked different for the woman than it did with the guys with the rock, but he saved all of them in that moment.
Yeah.
Isn't that amazing? Yeah. Love saves everyone in the space that they're in, whether they're holding the rock or they're on the other end about to be stoned.
Or let's go deeper into the story and recognize the reason she was caught in the act of adultery is because there was probably some pharisaical peeking
Sure.
Toms
Yeah.
who were what were they
The whole
doing?
thing,
How did
yeah.
you know? Where'd it go? Like, why were you looking in that window?
Yeah. And where was the guy?
Yep. Exactly.
Right? Because the guy should have been on trial too.
Exactly.
And there should have been two witnesses there as well, you know.
Yeah.
You know, the beauty of that story that I love is there was one there who was without sin, and his name was Jesus. And he refused to throw the stone.
Yeah.
And then he releases this woman into freedom, not by telling her to go and sin no more, but by first telling her there's no accusation and there's no judgment or condemnation here for you today. We can never go our way and sin no more until we are free from the voice of shame and accusation and judgment.
Yeah, come on.
It's good, man.
Yeah,
It's good.
totally.
David, we are big fans.
Yeah.
Man.
Yeah.
We really love what you're doing.
Oh, thanks, guys.
We have there was probably some other things that we definitely, I got a whole list of questions we didn't get to, but I don't want to keep you much longer. We're really grateful for you.
I think this might need to have a part 2.
Yeah. I got to ask you, because we've had you an hour. Yeah, we got to talk tacos for a second anyway. Yeah. I mean, you a taco guy? He shrugs.
No, I'm like, I was relaxing the shoulders, ready to get into tacos. We're a big taco family.
Okay, all right.
Tell us about an Australian Australian taco adventure.
We have where we live, about 2 minutes drive away. There's a fast food chain here called Guzman and Gomez.
Nice.
I don't know if you have it there,
No.
but it is a Mexican
Yeah. Yeah.
tacos, burritos, tortillas place, and it's going gangbusters in Australia. It's really popular, and so yeah,
That's your spot.
we frequent that. I'm not a meat eater, like I've not.
Okay.
I just don't do animal products. But,
Yeah.
So we do a lot of beans. We would do tacos or nachos a
Okay.
few times a week, and that's we love it.
Nice.
That's it.
It's a great family food, right?
It is,
It
man.
is.
It's like communal and
It is.
visceral and messy.
Get your hands in it.
Totally.
Yes. You're licking your fingers. It's dripping down the elbow if you're doing it right.
Exactly. This is true.
Yeah.
Big taco fan. Tacos are a thing in Australia.
That's awesome. Who are your influences? What are you reading right now?
I'm reading. I've discovered that you started publishing a couple of books, and then a lot of people want to send you their books.
Yeah.
So, which is lovely.
Yeah.
So I'm reading through some of those. I can't recall what they are off the top of my head. I am adoring a poetry collection. I want to get the title right. It's called. It's a collection from Eastern and Western poets and philosophers. So we're talking everything from Christianity, including Catholicism, and Sufi and Muslim. And I think it's called Love Poems from God. I've wept through these love poems from God, 12 Sacred Voices from East and West, by Daniel Ladinsky. A friend sent it to me, and dude, like, if we think, you know, and I don't mean bad about this, but if we think Bethel or Elevation or these guys have songs of intimacy and mushiness, they got nothing on 1600 years ago. You like the language and the poeticism and the intimacy and the vibrancy of these guys. I just it has blown me away. Let me read you one. I think this is from Francis of Assisi. Let me finish on this.
Yeah.
Because you guys will love this, I think.
Yeah.
I think Francis of Assisi was tortured for his faith. So we're talking 1600 years ago, I think. It's called I Cobbled Their Boots. It's only short. How could I love my fellow men who tortured me? One night I was dragged into a room and beaten near death with their shoes, striking me hundreds of times in the face, scarring me forever. I cried out for God to help. I cried out to God for help until I fainted. That night in a dream more real than this world, a strap from Christ's sandal fell from my bleeding mouth, and I looked at him, and he was weeping and spoke. I cobbled their boots. How sorry I am. I cobbled their boots. How sorry I am. What moves all things is God.
Wow.
Dude.
Yeah.
Like, there's a semester to unpack that.
Wow.
But he knew Christ was with him.
Yeah.
Wow.
And he's in all things.
Yeah.
So that sort of stuff, that's influencing me at the moment. Some of these older writers as well.
Wow.
Love it.
Beautiful.
I'm a fan of a lot of the people you bring onto the podcast, of course. The guys that hang out with Paul Young and Brad and all these guys. Just deep respect for the places and the spaces they hold for people to safely ask questions, and I love their vibe. Like, if I could say it like that.
Yeah.
Like, I have gone. You guys might be the same. You meet people.
Yep.
And you think, man, you kind of are like Jesus in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
So whatever theological diet you're on, tell me about it.
Yeah.
Like, that's my jam. It's not what fits me now. It's can I see myself in you?
That's it.
Is there something in you I'd aspire to be like?
Yeah.
Now tell me how you see God.
Yeah. Love it.
Because I'm keen. I'm keen for that.
That's good.
Well, David, you
Amen.
are certainly in that club of people on this podcast that are really doing yeoman's work in representing Jesus well.
Oh, very kind of you.
And in awakening hearts. If I could just quickly prophesy over you and this book and your work, you're going to heal a lot of people.
Yeah.
Obviously, we know the healer is in you, but he's definitely working through you, and we love what we're seeing.
Thank you.
From your life.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Great to have you on. Where do we find you?
If you go to davidtensen.com, they'll be able to find the books. If your listeners want, I do commission poetry as well. So I'm writing poems every week, and that's been a huge blessing, doing stuff for memorials and funerals, weddings, marriage restorations, everything. So that's been a huge blessing, and thank you. I'll take that prophetic word, and it is my prayer people find healing.
Yeah.
In that it is, if there's healing there, it tells me Jesus is at work, and something is. Yeah. The kingdom is coming. That's all I'd say. That the kingdom is coming.
Love it.
Amen.
Love it.
Amen. Thanks, bro.
Thanks, guys. Thanks for having me.
Hey guys, we're so glad that you are joining us for season 2 of Rethinking God with Tacos. You can find me, Derek Turner, at rivercharlotte.com. That's my church. And I'm on all the social medias as Pastor Derek T, Derek, Pastor Derek T.
Yeah, and he's a Twitter savant. You got to follow him on Twitter. I'm also on Twitter at Jason Clark Is, and you can find all of these podcasts, including season 1, on all of the platforms. You can also go to afamilystory.org, and everything's there. If you sign up for our mailing list, we send out a weekly email that has articles, podcast information, and we also let you know about new books coming out or events that we're connected to. So like, share, retweet, and man, if you could write a review, it actually does something for the rankings. It makes it more available. So,
but a 5-star review, of course.
Yes.
You know, if you can't write a 5-star review of something, like, just don't even write a review.
Don't worry about it.
Yeah. It's kind of like if you can't say something nice,
don't say anything at all. I like that, and then apply that to this podcast. Definitely.
That's my motto. That's what I do.
I love it. So love you guys. Appreciate you coming on the ride with us. God bless.